Artistic Director of the National Children's Orchestras of Great Britain, and I also have a string quartet called the String Credibles, and we perform not on concert platforms, just in different community settings and in unusual places. So my life is split in lots of different musical directions. The City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra is a 90-piece contract orchestra, a big orchestra, a bit the opposite of Gavin's orchestra in a way. We are all on contract. Our contracts are variable. You can kind of pick and choose what you do a little bit. So my contract with the CBSO is 50%. So I do 103 days there a year for them, and the rest of the time I do other things. So this is the CBSO, and this is me there in the middle of the CBSO. And I'm a very small part of a very big machine. As you can see, we have 5 choruses. You can't see so well, but there's 5 choruses at the back there, 90-odd piece orchestra and contract orchestra. This is our hall in Birmingham, Birmingham Symphony Hall, which holds 2,300 people, a fantastic hall and venue for us. We also have a centre of our own, a little bit like the Halle that Gavin was mentioning. And this is our CBSO Centre, which is the home of the management team, the library, and also the rehearsal venue and chamber music education venue. Our principal conductor at the moment is Mirga Gražinytė. So with her, we work on everything, well, and with lots of guest conductors and artists as well. We play lots of concerts every year, lots of different sorts of concerts. We record and we tour. And we're just back from a tour. In fact, we were in Germany last week. We did a big tour around Germany. So lots of different activities within the CBSO. So I'm fundamentally a player in the CBSO, but Evgeny's asked me to talk about the things that I do beyond playing my instrument. And I've put these now into 6 categories to share with you for the things that we do in our orchestra and that I do personally. And those, oh, it's gone. Those 6 things, hopefully, oh, there we are. No. Hopefully it will come back in a minute. They're chamber music, representative roles that we have, playing for diverse and new audiences, working collaboratively, working in health and well-being, and doing creative work in schools and with children. So first up is chamber music. Chamber music sort of started big time at the CBSO when we opened the CBSO Centre 20 years ago. And when we opened the centre, the players, the musicians of the orchestra, decided that we wanted a chamber music series for us to play in and to play alongside visiting artists. So our chamber music series is run by our musicians, it's programmed by our musicians, and we invite anybody who's a soloist to join us in the chamber music program. So these are some of the guys that I've been lucky enough to play alongside in our chamber music program. And the learning, I think, from doing that 20 years ago has been, it's really, really key in developing our musicians to give them opportunities to program, present, create work themselves, and not always be told what to do all the time. It's really, really good for recruitment because musicians love to have the opportunity to play chamber music and to have an individual voice as well as a collective voice. And we prioritize the section players, not the principal players. So if 2 players want to do it, and one is a tutti player and one is a section leader player, it's the tutti player who does it, because they're the ones that rarely get a voice or rarely get that opportunity. So the chamber music series is not only about playing great chamber music and having fun, but it's also about developing our musicians and developing the organisation as a whole. So that's chamber music, which is quite close in a way to what we do on the concert platform. The next thing is representative roles. Now, this is something that Gavin touched on, and I think Evgeny as well. We have lots of player representation across the whole company. The musician's voice is completely part of everything that we do strategically, economically, musically, artistically. So we have, and I've done all these roles in my different time in the orchestra. At the top of the organisation, lost the screen again. We have a board of governors who oversees the running of it. We are a charity, and because we are a charity, we have to comply with certain rules and regulations in order to take public money. So the board sits at the top, it's about 16 people, and of those, 2 of them are musicians from within the orchestra. So we're right at the very top of the organisation, and I have had that role, and it's quite a difficult role for a musician. You're suddenly in a very alien kind of environment, one that you're not really used to, and often part of making some very difficult decisions about the company. For example, I was in a discussion about closing the pension scheme for the musicians, which was bad news for the musicians. But ultimately, for the business to continue to flourish, we had to change the way we delivered pensions. So in order to have a decision that the players kind of trust and believe in, having had players in that discussion and in that decision-making is really key. The next player representation we have is 3 players are part of an artistic think tank, where we are involved in planning repertoire, we're involved in what artists we work with, we run appraisals of every artist that we work with, every conductor we work with. We have our own website that is run by the players, and we confidentially submit appraisals of every conductor that comes. And that then informs, that's then shared with management and then informs who we want to work with as we go forward. So if, as Gavin says, we're quick to say if we don't like someone, and then it becomes very clear, is that someone we want to invite back to be part of the CBSO journey or not. So the artistic voice of the players is very much there. The next thing is the players. There's a players committee, which is more about operational things. So things like, when we're touring, do we stay here, do we stay there, do we want to walk, do we want to get buses, all the things that affect the kind of day-to-day running. And that's 6 musicians involved in that, because that's quite a lot of discussion and negotiation. We also have a musicians' union, which most of our musicians are members of, and that negotiates with management over pay and conditions. And then we finally have a health and safety committee, which has musicians represented on it. So we're looking then at hearing protection a lot at the moment, but also at anything to do with the health, safety, well-being of the musicians. Now, these roles are all voluntary. We don't get paid to do them at all. And they take a lot of time, and they're elected. You're elected into those roles by your fellow musicians. So you have that role for 2 years, and then you can carry on if you want, or step down. So I've done all those roles in my time in the orchestra, and it's, I think, a really good way of connecting the management and the orchestra. So the key learning there is we have a big, I don't know if you have the same thing, but historically we have a big divide in the UK between management and musicians, and quite often conflict, quite often tricky relationships. And having representatives in all the decision-making processes ends up by being no more us and them, it's just us together in making those decisions. And one of the key things, I think, for the musicians is when you have a voice, you then have a responsibility. When musicians are told what to do all the time, they can abdicate the sense of responsibility. But actually, when you have a voice and you're in a discussion, then you have responsibility for that decision-making process. And I think that's a very key kind of change in how musicians can view themselves. So that's the representative roles done. The next area that I've worked in beyond the platform is looking at new audiences. Who are the audiences that we want to play to as musicians, and what do they look like? So I've been involved for most of my career in looking at new audiences and looking how we connect concerts to new audiences. So the way I view it is that classical music is this incredible treasure, and we don't have quite enough doorways, quite enough entry points for our audiences into our world. So we have to think quite carefully about what are those new doorways that actually will let people in to see music in a different way and experience it in the way that they need to experience it. So to give you one example, back in 2006, I had a little girl who was then 3, and I decided that I wanted her to be able to enjoy concerts like I would enjoy concerts. And this is her. That's what she looked like then. And let me just go back, sorry, so you can see my lovely daughter. There she is. That's what she was like then, okay? So I want to bring her to a concert, but the concerts that I give, they're not going to work for her. She's not going to like that concert where you have to sit still, and where you have to behave, and where you have to be silent. So our concert was the equivalent, really, of this kind of room. You know, it's beautiful, it's perfect, everything about it is classy and classic and refined and wonderful. But that room is not going to work for my child, and that my child is not going to work for that room. Okay? So then I have to look at what it is that she needs in order to be comfortable as an audience member for our concerts. So she needs to move around, she needs to make some noise maybe, she needs some variety, some fun, some excitement. She needs to experience things that she's familiar with, but also things that are new, and she needs to see people like her. Okay, so none of those things would happen in a normal concert. So how do we transform our concert in order that those things can work for her? And for me, the analogy is you have to move your furniture around a bit. Your room is not going to work for her as it was. So we do have to be still true to our room. And the ingredients of our room that are essential are excellent performances of great music by great musicians. If we have that, we're still true to what we are and what we believe, but we just still have to do things a little bit differently. And it was a little bit bumpy, I have to say. We did have our moments of not being very comfortable with that. We had to change our player contract during that journey. It really wasn't as easy as you might think to change our room around in order to make that a possibility. But one of the key things, I think, is dialogue, okay? And I think, as Gavin said earlier, we're very guilty as a sector of talking to ourselves, as we are now, in a way. But dialogue with that person that you want to invite into your room. What do they need? What do they want? How could you change your room so it works for them without being untrue to your room? So these are a few pictures from these concerts that now started about 12 years ago. As you can see, the children can move around. It's very interactive. We use about 10, 12 musicians from the orchestra. They get to have a go. This is a game. I don't know if you have the same game in Russia. We call it musical statues, where the music plays and when the music stops, you have to freeze. So the kids are learning to listen by doing something really active. Then they're dancing, and at the end they get to come up and see the musicians, meet the musicians, try different things, try different instruments. And one of the things that frustrated me as a child was you never got to choose what instrument you learn. Usually your parents decide what instrument you learn, but this is a forum where you can go and look at everything, try everything, and decide what's right for you as a child. So notelets, which are these concerts, we call them notelets. They started about 12 years ago. They were, this was for their 10th birthday, we did this little thing, and they're now probably the best-selling concert that we do. We do 15 a year, capacity is 250 children, and everything sells out. Like our Christmas concerts sell out in like May time or something. It's really super popular. So that, I think the success of them is the dialogue with that audience and being true to great music making. The second area of perhaps newer audiences is family concerts. I know many of you, I'm sure, do family concerts, but these are some pictures from one that I did a few years ago, 2016, I think, Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra. I present the concerts, I do the chat for the orchestra, so it helps me because I know the musicians super well, so I know what they're going to enjoy and I know what they're not going to enjoy. I know how to make them feel comfortable and confident so that they're communicating well with the audience that we have there. And the audience can be super varied for a family concert, as you'll know. It might be 2-year-olds, it might be 90-year-olds, a complete mixture. We like to have a bit of fun and to push the musicians a little bit to do things they might not normally do. Like this, for example, playing hose pipes in the main symphony hall. So the first half of that concert was in the hall, and the second half was in the foyers. The idea being that we had the strings, I don't know if you can see there, the strings were on the ground floor with the percussion. On the first floor we had the woodwind, and on the top floor we had the brass. And it meant the kids could choose which floor they wanted to go to, which instruments they wanted to get close to. And then on each floor we played something different. And at the end we played the firework music across the whole three floors. So it was like a complete surround sound kind of experience. So the children could get really close, they could talk to the musicians, they could see what was going on. and be really a part of it. I think one of the big things for me is making the audience feel that they are part of that performance, that they're sharing it. They're not just passive, they're actively part of it. One other thing that I found super useful in presenting concerts to new audiences is the digital opportunities we now have. So this is another concert I did for Dance Around the World, and we had a big screen like this above the orchestra and used digital projections, and these are just some examples of the slides that I used. So we were going all around the world, and in the first piece we were playing a Takemitsu waltz, so we had Japan highlighted there, so you can see where Japan is, and then Austria highlighted because we're playing a waltz, and all the way over there, and then the visuals of what actually this piece is. And because kids today, as you all know, are super visual, that, you know, everything is, you kind of need, quite often you need a visual stimulus to make the oral, the listening work. And I find it really, really helpful in keeping their concentration, especially if there's, I tend not to move the slides when the music's going. It's usually in between, so the music, when the music is playing, it's the focus. But actually, the digital options are huge now for what you can do to help connect with new audiences. Schools concerts is another thing we do, and I do it in different orchestras actually in the UK. So this is an example of the Ulster Orchestra in Belfast in Northern Ireland. The great thing about schools concerts is you know exactly the age you're working with. So it might be 8 to 10-year-olds or something, and the concert you program for 8 to 10-year-olds will be different for the concert you program for 10 to 12-year-olds. So being able to be really, really specific for that age group is really great, and making it active. One of the key things I think for any child audience is they need to be active and be part of it. And this is some of the children copying our conductor, feeling like what it might be like to actually conduct and direct an orchestra. So the key learning for me from doing all those things with schools and families and young people is that the concert's about the music and the musicians, not about the presenter at all. So actually being really, really keyed into what the musicians need and want and what music you're programming. That children and young people need to be active. They can't be passive, and a lot of adult audiences are quite passive. So how do we make classical music active for young people? And that actually you need to take real care of your orchestra when you're doing this, so that there's nothing worse than an orchestra looking unhappy and grumpy and put upon. So making sure that they are engaged and happy and supported and have everything that they need is really important to it being successful. So when I'm presenting, half of my energy is going that way and half of my energy is going that way to make sure that they're with this journey and we're in it together. So playing for new audiences is about being true to your product, identifying that audience, identifying the barriers. Why can't they access you? Eliminate those barriers if you can. Welcome your new audience, and then tweak and adapt and refine it and make it better every time. And it's not super easy, and that's one of the frustrations, is you think, I want to get this right really now, and there'll always be things that you don't quite get right, and that's fine, because that's part of experimenting and journeying with it. So that's the new audiences section. The next thing is collaborative working. Quite often, for our orchestra, people will come to us and say, we'd like to work with you. And this is just one example of quite an unusual partnership that we did. It was a firm of lawyers, of solicitors, who came to the CBSO, and they work in personal injury and a lot in road traffic accidents. So part of their corporate responsibility, giving back to the community, is to support work around road safety for children. So they came to the orchestra and they said, can you create a concert about road safety for children, teaching children to cross the road? Okay, so this is an unusual kind of request, not the kind of request you might get every day. And so they came to me and said, do you think we can do this? And I said, I don't know, shall we have a go? So we had a go, and I worked with a sort of theatre director and also a composer to write this new piece of music all about crossing the road. And the essential premise of the story was that I was stuck on one side of the road. You can see the road there going through the middle of the hall. The musicians were on the other side of the road, and I had to try and make it to the musicians in order to be part of the performance. So we had at the shows, did lots of shows for lots of different kids. We had our chief executive, we had the fire brigade there, we had the police there, we had the solicitors there, and a very, very big cross-section of society in a strange way. So it then went on to win an Arts and Business Award because it was quite a novel way of working, something quite unusual. And I have a little short film now of that project for you.
I've just been to see a performance about crossing roads safely.
Hi, I'm the CTS clock. Today, I'm going to help you learn how to cross the road safely.
Mr. Clock and the musicians helped us cross the road.
Hello, welcome to Sibiri Centre. I'm going to need a little help from you. If I ask you for a rule, will you tell me what to do?
Well, this is the Clock on Safety Schools performances, and it's sponsored by DBS lawyers and work that they do in schools around road safety.
Well, music is a great way of engaging children, and a message can get across much more powerfully with a song and with some good, strong words and a fun experience.
The CBSO got me involved as a professional storyteller to weave a narrative that would bring the music into play and cover all the road safety aspects and also make it a bit fun for the children.
I'm going to cross the road. I think it's great fun because it's very different to what we normally do. It's almost like a piece of theatre, really. So it sort of gets the message across, which could otherwise be quite dry, in a really entertaining and engaging, interactive way.
Today has been really something that's built up over the last 2 years, where we started to work with a road safety charity called Break. We also started to work with CBSO, and then our operations director, Sishu Masood, was really keen to see if we could bring it to life.
Last year I came to one of their concerts. While I was sitting in the concert, I came up with an idea, so why not do something with CBSO to use music to convey the message of road safety to school children.
It was brilliant to see other people play live instruments. I saw the piano, the drums, the flute, and the violins. I really enjoyed the music. I've learnt that if you want to cross the road and you want to get to the other side of the road, you better follow the 4 rules before you do it. One is find a safe place to cross. You have to look both ways and listen hard and cross the road straight.
So that's quite an unusual example of something you can do in partnership with people that we would never thought of doing that ourselves, but out of a kind of approach, something quite unusual can happen. And the benefit of that really was that, surprising opportunities can be very rewarding. And what happened in working with the musicians in that way was that we pushed everybody to be slightly more theatrical and communicate slightly better. And then when the musicians went back into the main orchestra, like that evening to do the concert, they were like, God, this is a bit boring, isn't it? We're not actually communicating. We're not physical in what we're delivering. And then I think it ends up having a really positive impact then on what goes on the main concert platform as well. So for me, as an artist, as a musician, it's totally connected. It's totally the same thing. It's just about communicating what you love in a different way. So that is collaborative working. I'm going to talk very briefly about health and well-being because this is a huge area in the UK now, massively expanding area. We do a lot of work now in what we call relaxed concerts, which are concerts for children and adults with additional needs, so that they can very much be comfortable and be part of our family, so they can join in the music making in different ways. And again, here's our musicians being a little bit more theatrical as well. Pushing them into a slight discomfort, but all in a good way. And I think when the musicians then feel the connection with the audience, they feel that energy, then it's something that is really kind of revitalizing and energising. One other big area of work in the UK is music and dementia, music and the mind, mental health. And so there's an awful lot of work going on at the CBSO and elsewhere with older people in the community, especially older people that are losing memory, and musical memories are the last to go. So actually engaging with music can sort of bring people literally back to life and back to engaging with the world. So the key learning about health and well-being is that music has an altruistic value. It has a value to make people feel good and be weller, essentially, to improve their lives and to make them happier. And that's very rewarding as a musician, to be part of making somebody feel happier and feel better about who they are. So the last area that I want to share with you is creative work. Now this can push musicians into further discomfort, I would say. It's basically a project that we've been running for years and years, since 1992, where a school adopts a musician or a group of musicians. And the musicians then become kind of resident in that school. And we go in and work with the same kids for a project, maybe 4 or 5 visits. And then we do a sharing event of work that we've created. So we'll take in repertoire from the main season. Any of these big pieces we've taken into schools, primary schools this is, so 7 to 11-year-olds. And we work with these kind of pieces. And what we do is we help the children to create their own version of these kind of pieces. So to give you an example, when we took Appalachian Spring in to a school, we created a resource pack which says you can create the opening of Appalachian Spring yourself by understanding what a pedal note is. So we'll find a way to play a pedal. And these are kids that don't play instruments. They're working with classroom instruments, so percussion, mainly percussion instruments. You find a pedal, then you work out what a triad is. You put one triad down and then you put another triad on top of it, which is exactly what Copeland does in the opening of Appalachian Spring. Then you just add a few dynamics to that. The analogy I often use is it's just like making a cake. You just have to know what ingredients to put into your music to make it work. So we add a few dynamics. Then on top of that, we create a little question and answer tune. So create a little 2-bar phrase that's then answered by another 2-bar phrase. And that's exactly what Copeland does in Appalachian Spring. And then on top of that, you just need to decide the structure of your piece, who's starting when, what's going on when. Those are your ingredients. Give it a title, and there you have your own little piece. And one of the great moments for me was when we'd done this actually with Billy the Kid, and the kids came to hear the orchestra play Billy the Kid. And at the interval, I went out and said to them, "Did you like the real Billy the Kid? Did you enjoy it?" And they said, "Yeah, we liked it, but ours was better," which was a great moment that actually they felt they had ownership then of that piece of music. So the key learning there is about developing our musicians. It's also about making a really clear connection between what happens on the concert platform and off the concert platform. That understanding that those children gain is exactly what they're then going to see in the main program. And a really detailed understanding then of how music works and what the ingredients are that make great music. Just share you a few things about the String Credibles. The String Credibles is a quartet that we formed 4 of us from within the orchestra. It's an independent charity, which comes back to some of the questions that Evgeny was asking about fundraising and things. We decided to set it up as an independent charity because we knew it would basically generate more revenue. We'd be able to do more work if it was independent. So we set it up as independent. We fundraise for it ourselves, and we basically do 2 things. We do performances in schools, like these are some examples of performances that we've done in schools, but we also have a residency in one particular school in an area of multiple deprivation. And there, we're not about teaching instruments or instrumental learning at all. We're about teaching creativity. What is creativity? Because creativity is a transferable skill that's essential in most walks of life. If you want to be a great scientist, you need to be creative. If you want to be a great politician, you probably need to be creative. And it's one of the skills, I think, that's increasingly in demand. So we work with the children in this school. We take 15 children each. There's 60 in each year, so one of us has 15 children, and we create a piece of music with them based on a theme that they're using in the curriculum. and then at the end of the day they share that little piece of music. So they're learning all sorts of things in that around how do you come up with a good idea of value, how do you test your idea, how do you work as a team, how do you evaluate things. So the impact of teaching creativity away from classical music is about helping people to understand what their potential might be, even if they don't want to be a musician, and that's fine. You know, it might be that they suddenly decide they have a passion for something or something else, and through the creative process, finding out individually who they are. So I've got another little tiny film here. These are the children that we work with, some of the children we work with regularly, talking about creativity.
For me, creativity is all about using your imaginations, getting messy a bit, like trying out randomly weird ideas but that actually turn out to be good, and using your imagination.
I think it's really important to be creative. Because you need to find something independent in yourself to do, like music, art, or anything like that. You have to create something that shows that who you really are.
You can have an idea, and if somebody else says that this is rubbish or something, they can't say that because everybody's ideas are different. If we all had the same idea, even if it was great, spectacular, magnificent, we would all be the same and yet need different ideas.
If you don't try an idea, you don't know if it might be a good idea or not. You might try it out and you might think, oh, that's not very good. Or you might think, oh, that's amazing. When I met you, I felt like, oh, this might be really, really fun. And like, now I've known you for like a long time. I'm like, wow, I can't believe I never actually knew you.
You feel like we're part of your lives now?
Yeah.
That's great.
So that's String Credibles and some of the work we do independently of the orchestra, which my 50% contract then allows me to do. So that's creative work. So I think that's kind of ticked the 6 boxes of the things that I was keen to share with you. In a nutshell, to summarise, for me as a musician, what's important about doing any of the work that we do, whether it's on the platform or off the platform, is about the connection you make with the people you're playing for or playing with. It's about connecting people. And one of my most favourite quotes is this quote by Jesse Norman. When an audience is truly engaged in a performance, this offering of positive energy can make all the difference in elevating the level of performance from something that is merely good to something that is extraordinary. And the exchange of energy between the performer and the audience replenish both. So actually that connecting with people is why we do it. And we do it however you do it, wherever you do it, that's what's important, I think. So for orchestras, I believe that every encounter with an orchestra should be transformative. We should be changing people, making them think differently, making them behave differently. And whose job is it to make that transformative? I think it's all of our jobs, and it's our musicians' jobs as much as it is our management's jobs. It's about building bridges, sometimes where it's difficult to find a bridge or difficult to find a way to have that bridge. And it's ultimately about being relevant to your community. And if orchestras are truly relevant to the place where they are, then I think pretty much everything about them improves. What improves? All these things improve, I believe, if we're truly relevant. But one of the challenges is in getting towards relevance is that we are going to need to change things about how we do things. And change is difficult. Everybody says that they love innovation, but everybody deep down hates change in some way. So for me, understanding the process of change has been really important in order to help support my organisation to change and me to change in different ways to be better. And 2 things, just the final 2 things to share with you about change, are 2 things that I wish I'd known a long time ago and now know in practice. First of all, this little diagram about the innovation adoption life cycle, which shows you that only 2.5% of the world are actually innovators, really. And 16% of the world are what we call laggards in the UK. Those are the people that don't ever want to change. So there's a big imbalance there. And when you're doing a change process, you have to get your early adopters on board really quickly. Then you have to work quite hard to get your early majority on board. And then you're at about 50% of your change. And then slowly the rest will come with you. But probably 16% will never come with you. So that is one of the challenges, is living with that 16% that are always going to be unhappy with where you're going, okay? So I think knowing that that is there and that is a reality is helpful, although it's always very frustrating, isn't it, that you can't get everybody on your change journey as quickly as you might want to. The other thing that's important about change, I think, is this, the change curve. How people react to change. So, for example, when we were doing the early years concerts, we had to, initially people were paid for them, and then eventually they went into the contract, people weren't paid any extra for them because they're a concert. So what happened in that journey is that people go, no, this isn't going to happen, first off. It's definitely not going to happen. They can't do this. And then they realise that it is going to happen, and then they get really angry for a bit and really resistant for a bit, and then they kind of give up. And then slowly you come out of that journey into and that probably took about 3 years to go through that journey of actually realising that this is now actually going to be okay, even though I didn't like the journey to get there. So understanding that the challenges around change are very real. I've got one final video for you, which Simon Rattle did for me for an ABO conference a few years ago now, where we were talking about musicians in leadership. Because within orchestras, musicians have the potential to be leaders of activity, regardless of where they sit, regardless of any hierarchy, regardless of their job, they can lead in different ways. And if every musician was empowered to lead, then orchestras would be more powerful as a whole. So this conference was about the dynamic between managements and orchestras, and the us and them kind of challenge. So I'll just share with you this 2-minute video of Simon.
Now, I'm sorry if I look like Grandpa in his best chair, but in a way this is Grandpa's chair. This is Carrie Ann's chair and desk at which he always sat at. So I feel there's been very special behinds here. I'm very happy to greet everybody, and I'm very happy to support Kath Arledge in what she's doing. And it seems strange to talk to you like this, but I just want to remind you from a distance how important it is that orchestral players have really leading roles in all of our organisations. Particularly working in all our education systems has taught me ever more how much orchestral players as individuals have to give. And of course, it's not only an education process for young people, it's an education for the players themselves. Suddenly, we're all on our own, trying to evangelize for our art. But what I've found is that the more the players are involved, the more it goes back into the music, the more creative they are rather than recreative. Sometimes the more difficult they are, because more ideas come through, and this is all for the good, it's all for the health of orchestras. It's not just a matter of the player's psychology, but it's a matter of this holistic idea of what an orchestra is. So I would utterly support this idea that we are all in this together. And I think the days of us and them have to be gone anyway. But the more we are in the same boat, the more you listen to your incredible players, the more you encourage them to have their own creativity, the better everything will be. Thank you. Have a great conference.
So I'll just leave you with one tiny question, really, which is the title of an article that I wrote a few years ago. Are our orchestral musicians violin operators or evangelists for our art? I don't know if we need to translate violin operators, but in the English language, that's like being almost like a factory worker sort of operating a machine, or are you actually really an artist and an advocate for the work that we do? And that's it.
Спасибо огромное, Кэтрин. Традиционный вопрос к аудитории. Есть ли какие-то замечания, комментарии?
Меня зовут Ян, город Иркутск, союз компаний.